Hello, and happy Mental Health Monday. It is the second Monday in August, and it is time for us to talk all good things mental health. Before we dive in, I wanted to take some time to talk about a post I made on my personal page on Instagram at _ I am Christina B. I made a post that was meant for me to talk about like the reality of what I'm going through. As an entrepreneur, it's extremely difficult to make this shift from the standard practices of work environments to like being your own boss, right? And it's been very difficult for me. Even as like a mental health provider, it is still extremely difficult to do a mental health focused business, right? So I made a post about it to show not only my accomplishments, because I've been told I don't celebrate my accomplishments, so I had to take an opportunity to shout myself out, but then also to be real about the challenges I'm going through. And so when I posted this, I didn't expect the feedback that I got. So I posted it on my Instagram, my Facebook, and my LinkedIn. And when I created the post, me and my business mind, I was like, okay, cool, maybe this will drive some traction or some insight to like my company and my business. What I got is a lot of like, you're inspirational, I'm so proud, this is great. And it just really took me aback because I did not expect that feedback like at all. I was telling this to my boyfriend and he's like, well, of course, like, what'd you expect? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, I literally had no expectations, and it's been a little overwhelming. And I'm trying to like sit in it of the amount of positive feedback that I've gotten and encouragement that I've gotten from my post. As of now, I'm still trying to process it because I literally was just like, let me just be real and open about like my anxiety that I face. And not thinking about the feedback that I've gotten. So thank you to everybody who has been like commenting on it or liking it, sharing it. Again, wasn't my intention, but I'm glad that it resonated with people. And I'm hoping to be able to continue the honest conversation and look into the stuff that I do, because I got into a space where I recognized a lot of people just thought like my life was like, oh, look at her, she's so great. But I was struggling like behind the scenes. So I'm going to try and make some more of those posts and be frequent with those. Thank you, yes, the background. I actually have another post coming up about how redoing my office was actually, it made for a really good before and after, and you'll see the pictures, but it actually was a production of my anxiety. But save that for another day. So today there's a question which is pretty timely, as there's questions about what back to school looks like in the middle of a pandemic. In particular, how can we attend to the emotional and mental needs of students during this time? So the question is, how has the company or myself changed or adapted the practices to meet the needs of students and others in this virtual world we're living in? And any tips and strategies for educators to create safe spaces for young people to talk about mental health while we're not able to connect in person. So I'll talk about the beginning. First question about how I've changed or adapted the practices to meet the needs of students and others in this virtual world we're living in. So what's great is that, which is why I also want to preface with the post I made earlier, is I was fortunate enough that I had already been creating a business focused on student mental health in a way that allows us to connect virtually. So when I first started my business, we were doing I focused a lot on like in-person stuff, right? Like workshops I was doing, presentations I was doing, and like how I can get into schools, get into districts, get into organizations. However, I already was crafting this idea of having an online course. So for me, it was beneficial that this pandemic allowed me to like ignite that idea. Oh, ignite edu, right? Ignite that idea to move forward with an online course. And it pushed the idea further and faster, recognizing that because of this time, right, students were really struggling. So when this whole thing started, I was still working as a school social worker, and it was difficult, right? I'm used to seeing students in my office, they play games, We played, do all these like in-person one-on-ones. They can drop in if they needed support. If they had things that they didn't want to talk about with their parents, they had a space in the office, right? So there's definitely this ability for this in-person connection. And when we made the shift online or virtual, etc., it was hard. It was hard to feel like I was truly connecting with my students. I struggled a lot, and I think I talked about this at the beginning of the pandemic about my anxiety and fear surrounding those students whose school was a safe space, where they now have to be in a home that was chaotic, that may be dangerous for them, what have you. So it was definitely jarring for me at the beginning of trying to figure out, how does this all work, right? What do we need to do? How can we make solutions? So I took all of my content that I'd already had. So I created a workbook, I said workshops and presentations and stuff. And I thought, how can I make this virtual? How can I make this accessible, right? The benefit is that with virtual, I'm now accessible in more places. When I was focused on in-person, I was limited most likely to like my tri-state area, right? New Jersey, well, maybe more in tri-state. New Jersey, New York, maybe Philly, Connecticut, right? But now I want it to be accessible to most, if not all, students, right, through this virtual environment. So the pandemic, and it allowed me to get creative, and I love getting creative, of how I can offer services and support to students' mental health in this virtual world. So for me, that meant shifting my material online. I first started with this Google Classroom. I was doing it through Google Classroom and Zoom and doing like this mixture. I've learned I'm not that big of a fan of Google Classroom because I'm an aesthetic person, and Google Classroom isn't so pretty. It's a little ugly. And I guess you can get like fancy or pay more, and like you can get nice looking Google Classrooms, but I'm a one woman show, and that wasn't happening. So I was able to get started with my online course. I was running it on Saturday mornings with my students via Zoom, and then supplementing with Google Classroom to provide the content. And in our online course, which is fully opening this Saturday again, we go through things of just understanding and talking about mental health. We talk about stress, we talk about resiliency, we talk about mindset, positive psychology, right? And what was beautiful about it is that it allowed a space for students to talk just about their mental health during this time, right? We created a community, we created connection, and students really appreciated that opportunity and that space to do so. They were very invested and willing to grow their mental health. And I think that ties into the next part of the question, and so how can educators, right, create these safe spaces for young people to talk about mental health while not being able to connect in person? And the first thing that always comes to mind is the intentional willingness to do so, right? So what that looks like is if it's going to be a weekly Zoom room that you do just for mental health, right? No matter if one student shows, if 5 students show, if 0 students show, right? Keeping it consistent and open. If you have to say, oh, sign up for this or sign up for that, it makes it as another added layer of pressure for students sometimes to be able to sign in. But 2, when you're working with students virtually, and I think this can go for even in person, this is my big push no matter what, virtually or in person, mental health shouldn't live in a separate space, right? We don't just have or work with our mental health in just separate spaces. It affects us in every single part. So when you are having a welcome back, right? If you are having your virtual math class, your virtual ELA class, how are you integrating mental health into those spaces? Is it through intentional questioning? Is it through check-ins? Is it through how you're talking about the assignment? Is it the way that you're setting up due dates and deadlines and just how you're creating the assignments, right? That is how you can be intentional. And that's what I meant when I say intentional willingness to work towards students' mental health and attending to their mental health, right? That it has to take some intentional practicing and planning. So I think those would be the 2 biggies is having a virtual room weekly set up Tuesdays at noon that's just meant for students to come in and have a space to talk. And again, it doesn't always have to be a structured talk about mental health of like, today we're going to do this, today we're going to do that. Just a space to talk, right? A lot of students, when I was still working in my contract, we did wellness classrooms on Google Classroom. So a wellness classroom was a space for students to do literally everything else that wasn't academic, right? So we put up there like meditation exercises, yoga exercises, just games that they could play together, right? It was just a space to have all of these different resources that were non-academic, because it can get very overwhelming, right? In general, school I think is a little too much sometimes for students, with all the academic pressures that we have now. But how are you creating a whole space just for them that doesn't have to be related to academics? But then two, when you are in these academic spaces, like your math class, your ELA class, social studies, whatever, how are you intentionally checking in on their mental health, or having them understand that their mental health is important in those spaces? If you have more questions about that, or you need more help or strategize about that, feel free to hit me up. I love doing this stuff. I love planning. I love discussing. I said I've done this. So if you do need help or assistance with that, let me know. Our online student mental health course is a really good resource. So it works best in terms of it being integrated into things that you're already doing. So we have an organization right now that has it built into their programming. So instead of students having to have a whole separate day to join in, they already know that every Saturday they do programming from 10 to 12 for students. So for 4 weeks, from 10 to 11 is just about their mental health, right? That's being intentional, and that's letting students know this is important. So I'm excited to hear from you guys. Again, our course is opening online, different than before. Before we were doing it via Zoom and Google Classroom. Now we have a fully separate online platform where there's modules where students go through the modules by themselves, as well as having live discussions with myself and their peers. And on top of that, there's a community discussion board to keep the conversation going. And I can't wait to get more students enrolled in that piece. I think it is a way for the company to reach more students, to be more accessible to students. But we also do private groups. So if you are an organization and you want us to work with just your students privately, we do create a whole separate module set just for your students. You get the opportunity to have just separate chats with me. Your students can have separate chats with me, as well as their own community discussion board. So if you're interested, please let me know. You can slide in a DM, you can send an email, hello@igniteedu.net. Feel free to also check out my own personal post that I made on my page if you want to feel inspired, as some people said that they were. Again, it still feels weird to say that because I was just being real and honest, but I guess that's what people need more of. So I will try and get more of that out there. @I am Christina B is that Instagram name. So thank you for joining in for this Mental Health Monday. Just to recap, we talked about how the company was able to make a shift during this time to be more accessible in this virtual environment as it relates to student mental health by creating an online student mental health course meant for students. Again, it's meant for all students, so it can be adapted for elementary school students, middle school students, high school students, and college students. But then also, what can educators do to help with their students' mental health during this time, especially within the virtual environment? And it's important to have intentional willingness to make change. So that looks like creating a consistent wellness space for students. It looks like, and within your academic spaces, you're asking the right questions, you're showing students, you're modeling what it looks like to take care of your mental health. So again, if you need any assistance, you want to talk further, to strategize, plan, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I love doing this work, and I will see you all next Monday. See ya.